Emile Suotonye Deweaver is back. If you haven't listened to the first episode that Emile was on, I will link that in the show notes. A refresher, Emile is from Oakland and he was locked up for life. Got out only after 21 years at a few different prisons in California. His book just came out. It's called Ghost in the Criminal Justice Machine. Emile's writing through some of the most grief-filled moments of his life, and it comes out on the page. For example, an excruciating moment where he got a letter from a kid who idolized him for having killed someone. The book deals with so many things like power hierarchies and white supremacy in and out of prison, the need to perform and deny what you know to be true in order to satisfy parole boards, how nonprofits that are meant to help incarcerated people often perpetuate mass imprisonment. If you read the book in good faith, I think it points us further towards the conclusion that you have to be brain dead to believe that prisons in California are about rehabilitation or justice at all. How fortunate am I to get to read books like Emile's for a job, below minimum wage paying job? But you could change that at patreon.com/San Francisco, where you can sign up, become a member, make life a little easier on myself and Tofu, our editor. It helps us spend a little bit less time at our other jobs. Thank you to the member, the Process X3, for subscribing. So you were telling me about your first few book events, which sound very positive.
Yeah, I was telling you about the first one. I got a standing ovation, and it was like that was very validating. It's like, I don't think I've ever been to a book reading and seen a standing ovation. And my kid was there too. So that was really dope. I'm generally like telling stories, and some of those stories involve my kid. And this question came up that like involved kind of like my kid, right? Like the answer, not the question itself. And I started like talking about it and then realized, oh, they're right here in the front row. Like I've never told them this story. Perhaps I should tell them. And I just like kind of just spoke to them and told them this story. Yeah, it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. And it's also
Have
like,
they read the book yet?
I doubt they've read the book, but
Maybe the audiobook. Wait for the
yeah,
audiobook.
yeah. I got an audio code for them. That's a good idea. I'm gonna send them one and be like, if you want to listen to it, here you go.
Sweet. Yeah, no, I'm very stoked to have you back. It's been like about a year and a half since you
Hmm.
were on last to talk about Mr. Gavin Newsom. If people want to hear more about that, we talked about Gavin Newsom's Norway model for prisons. But today we're going to talk about Emile's new book. Stoked to have you back. I
Yeah,
think you were in the process of writing it last time we talked.
it was, and I'm pumped to talk about the book. But just for y'all who it needs to be said that whole Norway model, Gavin Newsom, California model shit. Like, let's say it again, it's trash.
I am absolutely, yeah, with you on that for
Uh,
sure. Let's talk about the book. People may or may not remember that you grew up in Oakland. And in the book, you write that you don't think your father believed that it was possible to change the world's arrangement with white power. What made you think differently?
I mean, partly stubbornness, right? Partly like, the voice of my ancestors before I even knew there was such a thing as a voice of your ancestors, just like that still small voice, like speaking like inside me. And then partly just like a combination of like luck and feeling so like humiliated by the concept of giving in to white supremacy that it was just like a non-option for me. And that manifested in like some very destructive ways when I was like young and didn't really like have wisdom. But as I got older, began to get into contact with like actual effective means of fighting white supremacy, that's definitely where my passion went.
Yeah. And this book is about more than just dealing with white supremacy in prison. I feel like it's giving people a read on power hierarchies in society more generally. But you start with a story describing trans people's place in the hierarchy within prison. Could you describe why it felt important to start here?
Yeah, I mean, this is the entire reason. Like that story was once upon a time in a whole nother chapter that's not even in the book anymore. But like it's the reason I wrote the book. Well, I guess there were two reasons, but like that was like one of the top reasons I wrote the book because in this story, a friend of mine, he pulls me to the side on the prison yard and he's like talking to me about this trans person I'm visiting. Because when I was in prison, I was organizing. I would organize with activists in the free world, and they'd come in and visit, and we would strategize, and it was great. We had a good time. But in prison, like that's kind of like a black mark, like oh, you're messing with like trans people, right? And they don't have a framework for like trans people. It's just like you're messing with gay people to them, right? Within their framework. I grew up in prison. I understand where he's coming from and like where that's coming from, and we won't get into like all the deep layers of where even that comes from that we could just trace all the way back to like Christendom. But I was just struck because I was sitting on the yard talking to my friend, who is in this moment both my friend and my nemesis because he was perpetuating the thing I was devoted to like ending, which was like white supremacy. And he was a person devoted to ending white supremacy. So it was just like heartbreaking, confusing, also like one of those things that's just like if we don't lick this, we can't win. Like if we don't get a hold of this shit right here, right, we cannot win. But in understanding the process that was playing out and like the kind of like the frameworks that I offer in the book, I also understood that I'm essentially telling people everything you think you just bullshit, right? And you've been tricked and like you got to do something else. And that's not really a conversation that's going to go over with most human beings. And so I spent like 10 years just thinking about how to have this conversation. And this is just really the beginning of the conversation. Like there's chapters that had to go because it just had, scope issues. But like we got to have these hard conversations and we got to figure out a way to have them. So the reason why it's so difficult to figure out how to have them is because we don't even really have the language and the frameworks to have them and to hold them. And so the second reason I wrote the book is like we need to start creating the language. We need to start creating the frameworks that like we can put on the table and discuss in community and have a something shared that we can use as we're communicating and trying to figure out how to redistribute powers in ways that serve us all.
And it sounds like you've gotten some good feedback that this book is like one of those tools that people can use to start to have these conversations to unravel all of the layers of like specifically you're talking a lot about white supremacy and how it is at the core of all of our institutions, so many different ways that people move in the world, reasons for people's transphobia and other forms of oppression too. Wondering when you started picking up books by, people who write philosophical texts on issues like this from the past, like Frantz Fanon.
Yeah, I mean, the journey of that started when I was about 19 and like an OG kind of like was schooling me. And he was like, we were talking about women problems and things and like my relationship and the conflicts and my fears and my insecurities. These weren't his exact words, but essentially he told me, you don't have anything to offer anyone. You're in prison, right? Like it seems like you want a lot. Like you want care. You want like someone to accept your calls. You want someone to visit you. Like that's a lot that people are giving to you. What do you have to give to them, right? And this was like one of my first lessons in like relationship building, the necessity of reciprocity. And he said, and then he told me that like what you can have is knowledge. What you can have from this position, from this place is knowledge and wisdom, but that requires for you to go get it. And that made a big impression on me. And I began reading a lot and trying to understand the world more and delving into philosophy and like world religions. And I came to this point where, I was reading like the journals of like Ralph Waldo Emerson, and then there was this line that said like, write your own Bible. And I was like, what the fuck? You can do that? And that's kind of what I started doing, which really just intensified my thirst for like devouring multiple perspectives on the way this world works. That would eventually lead me into things like, I think his last name is Browder. I don't remember his first name, but he wrote like Secrets of the Nile Valley or Contributions from the Nile Valley, which was like dispelling a lot of myths around Egypt and like how Egypt is fundamentally like of African origin and not some other origin or not any weird ass theories of like how some Caucasians like migrated to North Africa. But with that, he also talked about the project of white supremacy and why we had the stories of Egypt the way that we did. Why, whenever we saw a movie about Egypt, it was a bunch of white people like playing these roles of Africans. And when that was my first like introduction to structural racism. And I was like furious, right? Because like I was like, I was thinking about like when I was in school and what we learned about Black people, which is like pretty much summed up in like, the Black contribution to world genius is like George Washington Carver, like
Right, right, right.
making peanut butter or some fucking shit like
Sure,
that, right? Like
sure.
this was our claim to fame, right?
Serving capital. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
totally.
yeah. Rather than like the fucking cradle of civilization who built the first cities and like built the first governments and built the pyramids and like all of this. And I could see how that lie was a part of the trick that had me living in a state of self-hatred, whether I was acknowledging that self-hatred or not, and how that has impacted my community at large. And I just remember in the middle of the book, just like getting so angry that I just screamed and hurled the book at the wall. And my cellmate was like, "Bro, what's wrong?" And I was just like, I was a bit out of control. I was just like so enraged. And all I could say was like, "What the fuck weren't they teaching us this in school?"
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like more important. It is more important than ever for them to keep a lid on that with, things like critical race theory and just teaching about the history of people of color in general. Can't have like a single name of a Palestinian in a history book just in case word gets
Just,
out that, oh, people existed in the
yeah.
past that were doing significant things. And it's absurd as like the internet kind of narrows as far as like who's in control of it. Fewer companies own the means of getting media to more people. It's like, I think it's important to have like more texts like this coming out so that not all of that gets lost.
I mean, and like the importance of like that movement you just described, that movement and our social fabric and our social structure, like the thing that like I'm trying to do with the book is help people be able to track that. Because like what you're describing is hegemony and the resulting problem, the imagination problem, right? It's just like how do we control culture? How do we control the culture producing mechanisms in society, whether it's the internet, whether it's schools, whether it's universities, whether it's like homeless shelters? Like, how do we control what is the norm and what is thought to be true and what is thought to be right? And the way that happens is by controlling what information we have access to. Because when it comes to imagination, on a neurobiology level, like, the centers of the brain that imagine are the same centers of the brain that are where your memory sits. So that kind of suggests that like you can't imagine something you have no memory or experiential basis for. So if you can control what we intake, you can control our imagination. And that's more
Right.
than just limiting it. It's also like being able to deftly manipulate us so that we think we're fighting the power when in fact all we're doing is making it stronger. So like that's the goal of these companies that are like eating up all the basically the access points, the gatekeeping points for like internet and information. That's the point of like Trump eviscerating the FCC and threatening news outlets and everything else and trying to bend people to only report a certain thing. That's the point of destroying education and then saying like, oh, we'll have online education with like the America's Great School, right? Where they can then teach the generations what they want to be taught while also destroying any other alternative information. Like that's what I hope people can understand about what Trump is doing in addition to like the rise of fascism is they're trying to restore hegemony to the prior state,
Yeah.
like in the 60s. And people are like, this fight isn't new. And like this country has always been white supremacist and it has never stopped being white supremacist. And that is very true. This country has never stopped being white supremacist. But I is still grieving that we missed a huge bus with the last elections because people were just thinking, well, it's always going to be white supremacists. But the thing that needed to be understood was like, no, what's happening is white supremacy is losing. And this is its maneuver to restore its power.
Yeah, their backlash
Yeah.
moment. Yeah. And yeah, that fear of them kind of losing their grip on a little bit of control was enough to put so much into pushing us back. Speaking of people like who are there to uphold that status quo or perhaps like even like push us back, you speak in the book about how Gavin Newsom chose to fill spots on this governor's advisory council that he has incarcerated people to kind of show like, oh, he's a governor who cares. He's a governor who's listening. But you deal with the fact that he's filling these spots on this advisory council with people with a very particular view, and that view is white supremacist. At one point you write, quote, "I had to become a white supremacist to get out of prison," which there's some like definite like wallops in this book. That is one of them, one of the quotes that it's just like stands out and you have to like give it a minute. Could you give people a taste of what that meant, of the kind of like performance of white supremacy for parole
Yeah.
boards?
And like, I want to like lead with some context. Like the reason why like I'm making these statements and even about like the people on like the governor's board is because to help us really understand what white supremacy is.
Yeah.
Because I think there's just like not enough knowledge about like what it is and like how it works. And if you really understand what it is, then the difference between someone who's intentionally or wants to be a white supremacist and someone who is upholding the structures of white supremacy and perpetuating it, whether even though they don't like white supremacies, the difference is just is academic. It doesn't matter. There's no practical reason to make a distinction between the two. And so for me, like, when I like Governor Brown commuted my sentence and like let me out of prison. I had 67 years to life. But Governor Brown would never have commuted the sentence of someone who like openly challenged the legitimacy of the status quo. The parole board would have never approved the parole of someone who openly challenged the existence of the status quo or the legitimacy of their authority. And these were things that like I did when I was in prison covertly, but to outright do it, like that's like I would never have gotten out of prison. And so, but how you do get out of prison is by validating the preconceptions of parole commissioners, by making white America feel comfortable, by like validating their value structures. Like, yeah, like I'm a sinner and you saved me, or like I ain't shit and like I have failed society, but say nothing about how society has failed you. These are all things wrapped up in the personal accountability narrative,
Right.
which strategically can be a really great path to personal success, right? Like almost everything I have, like there's an argument that like personal accountability and taking personal responsibility for my circumstances got it for me. So yes, great for success, for changing structures, for changing social conditions, for changing the world can't happen, right?
Yeah.
Which is why people are funneled towards that, right? Because that will never be a strategy that changes social conditions,
Yeah.
right? That is the strategy that says, actually, I've given up on changing social conditions. That's a strategy of hopelessness. Like that's the strategy that my father was involved in. Like you can't beat them, join them, or like there's nothing you can do about it. So just figure out how to make your safe and as successful as possible. That's the unsaid acknowledgement of or admission or surrender of personal accountability. And so if you are perpetuating a personal accountability narrative as something that is good and something that is the solution to our problems, you are perpetuating white supremacy, because that can never end. That will only perpetuate white supremacy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you do that, as I did that in like my rehabilitative narratives, like there was a point in that thing where I was like drinking the Kool-Aid and like believed it, and then there's a point where I realized it was utter bullshit. But when I realized it was other bullshit, I knew I couldn't push too hard on it, right? I didn't have the positionality to fight that power, right? So there are many trade-offs I made, and some of those trade-offs might have produce more good or bad. That's another conversation, and we like that one can unpack in communities and in accountability. But what it definitely did was perpetuate white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
And so given that, I was practicing white supremacy. And if I was practicing white supremacy, I was a white supremacist, right? People might disagree and they might split hairs and they might want to talk about like what a good heart I have or what a good heart they have, but none of that is quite relevant to a structural, cultural, ideological phenomenon.
It doesn't diminish that. Yeah, we're still upholding these institutions that are all about perpetuating white supremacy. I just wanted to read another quote. Quote, "Our success would be weaponized to abandon all the incarcerated people who couldn't do what we could do. And it's this moment where you're talking about like, you know, worthy versus unworthy in the eyes of the state and people on the parole board. And it's people should read the book. It's so well written, and the way that you speak about this topic of self abnegation and denial of what you know to be true, but in order to survive, it's kind of what you have to do. It cuts really deep.
Yeah, and it's like the example where like all the parallels don't hold completely, but the parallel I often give is like boot camp. Like the structure of boot camp, you
Mm-hmm.
break somebody down completely and then and then so you can build them up in the image that you want them to be, right?
Right.
And be responsible for that in their world. Like this institution is responsible for my value and worth now that they built me back up, even though when I came in here I was just like a piece of shit. Like that's the structure of boot camp. That's how a fanatic soldier is made. That's how you create a person who will go out onto the battlefield and kill a bunch of people for you. And
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitation is like similar, right? Is like the breakdown and the teaching of the person to like self-abnegate and erase themselves and then fill themselves with you and become the image that they want them to be. Now, in the case of the state, a prison state, the image they want you to be is someone who perpetuates their power, someone who perpetuates the status quo on which their power rests. And that is in essence what the rehabilitation process is. Like we bill it as a second chance, like, you know, help them heal and have more skills and do better. And like some of that, some like there's truth in some of that, right? But that's the same truth that's in like missionaries going to like villages to feed them. It's true the missionaries are feeding starving people. It's also true that the Catholic Church that sent the missionaries is responsible for the people being starved, for the people starving.
Yeah.
It's also true that they're not only feeding the people, they're also wholesale destroying their native culture and replacing it with Christianity, a version of which posits white bearded man as the ultimate authority in God. So, like, what these systems, like missionary work or rehabilitation or the politics of respectability, or like any number of near enemies of like actual liberation or justice do, is like they have the facade, they have the face of the thing that seems good. And then if you attack it, then it's like, oh, how could you attack this? How could you attack incarcerated people
Yeah.
learning to read? Gavin
Sure.
Newsom, how could you attack building a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center to help incarcerated people like
Right.
30 years before Gavin Newsom? How could you attack building a state-of-the-art hospitals to take care of incarcerated people in San Quentin? But there is more going on beneath that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's all bad shit.
Yeah, no, and I think yeah, the book is also so good at like pointing out some of these near enemies
Mhm.
as you call them, rightly so, and kind of yeah, helping us our eyes on a more liberatory approach. I guess one of the near enemies that you do mention in the book is an organization called Marin Shakespeare. Wondering if you could give people a taste of, in the book, you speak to how this organization that you got something out of participating in the end, it's a bit of a near enemy. Could you, yeah, speak to kind of what you got out of participating and how ultimately the organization was exploiting people inside and grows the power of the prison?
Yeah, I mean, for context, because like I don't want to feel like I'm picking on Marin Shakespeare,
Sure, sure, sure.
but like Marin, it's important to say that like Marin Shakespeare is an example I pulled out of the rehabilitation system. Like Marin Shakespeare isn't doing something differently than any of the other 100 rehabilitation programs
Right,
that are in prisons, right?
right, right.
This is the structure, and this is the flaw in the structure, and I'm using Marin Shakespeare to talk about it, right? And so. Yeah, Marin Shakespeare puts on like plays in prisons where incarcerated people like either perform Shakespeare or write original plays, kind of like inspired by Shakespearean themes, and they perform it for people in the public. And like I love being in Marin Shakespeare, like personally, like you know, I got to meet people, I got to connect with people, and like what I got from that was connection, which in a state of deep deprivation in prison is worth more than you might take for granted living out here in the free world. Quite like euphoric to be seen, to be recognized, to be celebrated when all you get every day is you aren't shit and no one gives a fuck about you, right? I got to perform and get good and be good at things and be celebrated, right? So there are these like emotional gains that I get in that. And like depending who you are, perhaps you parlay that into like other shit like networks and things like that. But on a structural power level, what's happening is slave labor and the fact that like we are the service population. We are what they raise funds on, right? And those funds do not go to like it's not like they're paying the incarcerated people. It's not like they're providing for the incarcerated people when like the incarcerated people get out. Like it's just salaries. It's like they're getting money to like pay salaries and run the organization, and they're doing that on the back of incarcerated people's like work and like sweat. And then in addition to like keep the doors open, they also have to like celebrate the prison and like, oh, the warden is so great and like this new and evolved way of thinking. And so you're just further legitimating the prison system that's causing all the problems that necessitate your program in the first place. So that's like just like, okay, on a personal level, my life felt better in this program. Like I felt happier in this point, and hundreds or thousands of incarcerated people would probably report something similar. But when you hold yourself to the discipline of asking power-wise, like what's happening here, right? What's happening is incarcerated people are going in and they're getting some like personal empowerment, but it's not structural power. So it's like we can't count this in a strategy for change. Money is going in from donors to like sheikhs to the organization, right? So they're getting more power because like money, because wealth is structural power. They're using some of this power for like programming for incarcerated people, but incarcerated people give it right back with the performances that like make them their money. Then they have a relationship with the prison itself that they celebrate and then thus legitimate like the prison structure as like, yes, this is the way. And so like the prison gets more legitimacy and so it gets more power, more structural power. Right? When you're examining a program or you're examining an intervention and you ask yourself, where is power moving to and who is it moving from? The power in this situation is moving from incarcerated people to prisons and the nonprofit organization in question. And I can't track any structural power being moved to incarcerated people. That is an intervention that makes the current status quo system more powerful.
Right.
And so in that way, it's like, it seems like it's doing something good, but it's actually a near enemy of the good thing you think is happening. It's actually doing the opposite. It's actually undermining the empowerment of incarcerated people.
Right. It's a really useful just example for people, I think, when you have a lot of useful examples of like how the role of near enemies is so detrimental potentially to long-term building more power, the people that we want to build power for, if you care at all about actual justice. Bringing it back to talking about like imagination, this is a like weird correlation that I'm finding between Dungeons and Dragons, which I played at junior high, finding a lot of the guests on this podcast, also D&D players, and also more generally, people who want to see a different world than the one we live in now. Do you remember what your character at D&D was?
Man, I have had so many characters in D&D and I could tell you about every fucking one of them. Right? But like, you know, like I played a lot of elves and a lot of humans, and I played a lot of like sorcerers, and I played a lot of rogues. Occasionally I would play monks, right? But like sorcerer and rogues, like those are like my favorite kind of characters. There was one exception, but in generally I do play characters with like a moral compass, not like a lawful good compass, but more of like, you know, more like a chaotic good compass, and like having a sense of like what is right and justice and like standing for it and fighting for it. The one exception is like is its own story, but it was amazing. It was like some of the funnest time I've ever had, and it came because we just had this corrupt ass DM that we united against, and then we just started destroying his world. We were destroying his fucking world, and everything he threw at us would make us stronger. It was so funny. I think that there is something to that, and we used to talk about that inside, right? Like we even tried to like create a program around it, like the idea of like, what is it? In the same way that like when we're performing these rehabilitative rehabilitation narratives. Like there's no, you can emerge from that whole, but you will not emerge from that unscathed, right? And that's just the somatic reality of performing something, right? Like your body
Mm,
doesn't really, your body's not really good at telling truth from falseness, from truth from fiction, right? If you're constantly doing a thing, right, your body takes it to be true, right?
mm,
Like for instance, if
mm.
I'm constantly pretending that other people are better than me so that I can make them comfortable, my body starts to believe that other people are better than me, right? There's some really complex psychology that goes into it, like, but at the end of the day, I feel like that's a simplified way of saying it, right? And so just as
Yeah.
like performing like these state narratives can sometimes people get lost in it. My dad performed Politics of Respectability and got lost in it. He became that
Mm,
performance, right? We were like entertaining the ideas like what does it mean to like play a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons and like perform integrity, perform sacrifice, and perform like all the good qualities that we reach for and want to like embody. And we were like really curious about like whether that could like literally a game like through a game could bring about change in people's lives and shifts in their perspectives. We never got to like execute it, but I think there is something to role playing and Dungeons and Dragons and a love of fantasy connected to more flexible imaginations. I don't
yeah.
want to say it's the solution to the imagination problem because it's not, right? Because like the imagination problem itself is an admission that we cannot over rely on our imaginations. Like we have to have ambitions that are bigger than our imaginations actually, but that flexibility that exists in like gamers and probably exists in many artists does position us towards the forefront of the imagination challenge and devising solutions and strategies against it. And I have also noticed that, I
Yeah,
mean,
I fully
yeah,
believe that.
it's like in prison, like I was playing, like prison in California is like Jim Crow, right? And so, like, we'd be in there playing Dungeons and Dragons, like across racial lines, like under threat, like not me, because like black people are like, have black people make up such a majority in the prison that our politics are a lot looser, right? So, like, there's no black person that's going to come to me and be like, you cannot play with a white person, right?
Mm,
But white people and like,
mm,
Hispanic people have a much tighter political line, right? And white people will come, like a white skinhead will come to a white person and be like, you need to stop playing Dungeons and Dragons with them black dudes or
huh.
we'll kill you,
Yeah, yeah.
right? They were still we had one game that we were running in secret and we were playing through the mail and the guy in the laundry was like passing it back and forth for us and things like that, and like that's the kind of minds drawn to that space. It's kind of hearts drawn to that space because while I could have run into conflict about that, like the white people involved in that, like they could have just been outright killed, like straight up outright killed.
Mm,
I've
mhm,
seen it. I've
mhm,
seen it. I've seen a dude get stomped into a hospital because his wife was black and came to visit him, right? So it's like that's how tight that politic is on that end. But we were like, fuck this. No,
yeah, yeah.
we are not gonna bow down to this like political standard in here. And I have noticed that in gaming communities in prison, outside of prison, like there is something to it. I don't know what it is,
Yeah,
but there
yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely is something to it.
Sure. And it might just be as simple as like, yeah, like values or our politics do seep that it's gonna seep into more imagination centered, like, yeah, games we play, or hobbies that we have. Speaking about like the physicality, just wanted to know, yeah, like there's an anecdote about shibari, which is like Japanese rope binding, where you
Mhm.
have to like sort of give yourself over to the person who's working with the rope,
Mhm.
tying rope, knotting all around your body. And I haven't read very much about shibari, but it was a very like, I thought it was an interesting way to think about, yeah, like physicality after getting out of prison. That I know was like an anecdote told from the perspective of someone else, but I was struck by it
Yeah, and
nonetheless.
the reason why I brought it in is like, I mean, so we're in the Bay Area, like talking about kink and shit is like nothing to us, right? But like in the wider
Right, right,
world, they're like, what
right, right.
the fuck, Shabbat?
For
Oh my
sure.
God. In a book on social justice, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, I know. Have you
but
gotten that response? I mean, I wonder. Yeah, like
not
there's
yet,
gonna
but
be a
like I'm
couple
waiting
people
for
who,
it.
yeah, read it in the middle of Podunk, Idaho, who are like,
Yeah, I'm like, what
"Whoa."
the fuck? Like, yeah. But I think that what can be what can be gained by just like settling into like, what is actually being like said here? Like, what is the purpose of like shibari in this context? And in the context, we're talking about a person who like has committed harm because they have abused their power. And something like pretty fundamental to like most kink are power dynamics and how to use power responsibly.
Mm,
And I'm sure this character, like, it was like you're talking about a section in the book that like I would like describe as visionary fiction in the tradition of like Octavia Butler. But there could be other ways for someone to learn how to use power responsibly, of course. And one thing that I'm reaching for in like trying to push against the imagination problem is finding those things that don't live in the common cultural zeitgeist and mining the wisdom in them. Because for one, like for me, like I personally was like, you know what is white supremacy like really hard on? Like what is it like targeting? Like what is it trying to destroy? Because for me, it's like what white supremacy wants to destroy is probably something that would undermine white supremacy. Right. And so like I become interested in those
mm,
things like alternative culture, kink, pre-colonial spiritual practices, paganism, like all these things that had to get erased for white supremacy to be built,
right.
right?
Right.
And like I feel like kink is one of those things, so I introduced that into a talk on abolition.
Yeah. 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 I feel like, yeah, there's so many ways in for people like the Shibari, like D&D, like the nonprofit industrial complex and Marin Shakespeare that people should be book clubbing this book for sure. A lot of different angles for people to like come in through. Also, one of your book events hosted by Chesapeake, who famously San Francisco's progressive DA before the right decided we can't be having that and then
Yeah.
spent millions and millions of dollars to recall him.
Yeah,
Just wondering, yeah,
before
how
the right
you.
decided that, yo, well, actually, we don't believe in states' rights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because most of that money was coming from out of state. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
wild.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is wild. I think it's one of those things that's gonna be looked back on, just like with prisons, the prison system that like what the fuck were people thinking?
Yeah.
But yeah, just wondering how you two connected.
We were in each other's orbit for a while. Like first, like when he was running for district attorney, the UCSF, the one,
Hmm.
the UC that's in San Francisco. Like
USF,
no, the other one with the four
UC
little four
Law,
there.
UC
Yeah,
Law.
yeah. So they asked me to like come and give like the opening remarks for the DA debates, right? And so like I did that, and that was like my first like contact with him. And then like people in his office reached out and like wanted and asked me to like be on like a council advisories council. So like our like contact was like through degrees and like hit like just kind of like in work, but like the real landing is like when he went to UC Berkeley. I have a lot of good friends at UC Berkeley, and one of them, was like, "Why don't you do something with Chaser?" I said, "Yeah, sure, let's do something with Chaser," right? And then we went into juvenile hall, the same juvenile hall that like I grew up in too, actually, to like talk to students and like teach. So we went in there together and then we met and that's kind of like where it started. And then he knew I was working on a book and he was like, when it comes out, man, let me know how I can help.
Cool,
So
cool.
I let him know how he could help.
Right on, right on, right on. Sweet. And also was wondering if you've gotten feedback on the book from anyone inside. I know it just came out, so
Yeah, not yet. But like I look forward to it. I've gotten feedback from a couple people who were inside with me but are now out, and they're moved in general, right? They're like, and they express their pride for me.
that's all the questions that I had. Say thank you for writing this book. People should go out and pick it up.
I'm feeling really proud that it's in your background, like on like your wall. I'm like,
Woo.
damn, that feels legit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Like my book is
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah, no, that's a very good feeling. Yeah, definitely had some of that same feeling when my little book came out a couple of years back. But yeah, more people should check out the book,
Yeah.
learn about some of the things that we talked about today and much more. Anything you wanted to let people know before, like, where to follow you?
Yeah, definitely. Like you can like I'm on tour and like I'm making several stops in the Bay Area, like in Santa Cruz. I still have the book fair. I'll be in Chicago in September. I'll be on the East Coast. So you can, if you want to keep up with that, you can follow me on Instagram at Emile Suotonye Deweaver.
We will link it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, come on board. Like give me a follow, give me a like, shoot me a message, I'll respond. Email Suotonye Deweaver is my Instagram, just like the name on the book.
Cool, cool. Yeah. And yeah, let's do this again.
All right, thanks for the call in.
All right, we'll talk soon.
All right, bye-bye.